Thank you again, Mr. Hummel, and good afternoon again. Hey, we got one. Well, in the Bible, leaven is often used as a symbol of sin. As a small amount of leaven can permeate into the entire lump of dough, sin can also infiltrate and infect our entire being. Understanding that symbol, understanding why we use leaven, is an important part. And removing that from our lives is crucial for our spiritual growth and our relationship with God. We kind of go through this cycle every year. We come back to this thing about leaven. But why, when we're talking about leaven, why is it that God has us throw out leavened bread? Why that symbol? Why, I've gone over all the parallels with it over my life in the church. I can see that. Okay, why throw out leavened bread? Why didn't he pick, wine, fermented wine? Why didn't he pick something else? There are other faiths that will not have meat for 40 days prior to, for them, the Easter timeline, so they get rid of meat. Why would he have them throw out leavened bread? I want to go over that today. We're going to look at and probably do some revisiting over some things we've probably talked about over the years and time of us being in the church. But some things may be new as well, but I always think that it is good to remind ourselves. This is one of the things that God told Israel to do. There's always going to be that next crop of people who are hearing it for the first time. There's always going to be people who've heard it from one person but not from another person. It's going to be a different perspective. And those are good things to be able to revisit. So let's first start off by looking at the symbolism of leaven in the Bible. Let's look at the symbolism of leaven in the Bible. I've given a couple sermons. I shared some links in the announcement to go over kind of like this concept of what leaven is. Now, leaven is that substance that is used to ferment dough. In fact, you would actually use, when I talked about wine or if you're making beer, you know that you use yeast also in both of those processes to ferment and to break down the sugars in the grapes or in the grain that you're using to make the beer or the wine. But for bread, though, it would cause it to do something different. Now, you get the bubbling and the gaseousness in wine, and you have to make sure you let that out. If anybody brews kombucha or kombucha, however you pronounce it, that stuff, right? If you're doing those home brews, you know there's a bit of fermentation process, right? So they bubble up at the top. But the end product that you drink doesn't have that same thing in it, for wine at least. For beer, you get a little bit of the carbonation that's inside of it. But with bread, that leaven, the yeast, causes the dough to rise. It lifts it up, it makes it light, it makes it porous. Now, in biblical times, again, I've mentioned this, there was a whopping one leavening agent. Today, as you might be going through your pantries and saying, well, what is leaven and what do I need to throw out? You have more than one to sit there and try to sift through. Most of them we can't even pronounce, if we're honest about it, but there are many. Well, in the time of the children of Israel, there was one, and it was generally speaking from the air. Now, if you kept over, like sourdough, like a lot of people did during the pandemic time, if you were keeping over a lump from before, well, then you could also use it, but it was still the same leaven concept, the same construct. It was just already encapsulated in this dough form in order to be able to use as a sourdough starter. So we have this idea of leaven, and that is what is used then, that Paul uses as a metaphor for sin. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 5, to start off with. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. This is a very popular verse when it comes to speaking about leavening in the physical context, but also bridging from the physical to the spiritual, right? This is where we get the metaphor there for sin being rooted in this leaven concept. Because it's one thing, it's nice to be able to use the comparisons, but you start getting this metaphor, well, it's like this. So 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verses 6 through 8, we read, "Your glorying is not good." And Paul is speaking to those in Corinth. He says, "Your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore, purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump. Which is an intriguing process, if you've ever made bread. So you've leavened your lump. It's all set to go. How would you get the leaven out of that lump? You just reach in and it's like when you put raisins in a cinnamon roll, right? You just, I can find all the raisins, just stretch it out, take the raisins out. No more raisins in the cinnamon roll. How are you going to get the leaven out of the lump? It's such a humorous thing if you are familiar with baking bread for Paul to say this, but he says to purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. There are two big metaphors for sin when we read these three verses, when we're talking about leaven. The first one being the pervasiveness, and that's kind of what I alluded to here. How do you take leaven out of a loaf of bread? Out of a lump? It's not really possible out of the lump. You do two things to kill leaven in that lump. You let it run its course, at which time it will die because it has consumed all the glucose and all the sugars possible in it, and it will just make that whole bit of dough rancid. And it stinks. And tastes horrible after the fact, right? If you were to bake it when it's gone too far, it's just not pleasant, right? So it's then the leaven is it's run its course, but it will decompose and it will eat and it will consume it all. The second way to stop the leaven is to put it in fire and you bake it, right? So we have bread that has been leavened by the yeast, but when you bake it, you cannot take that bread that was baked and stopped the leavening process, and we're I'll just grind this down now into its flour and components, and then I'll reconstitute it with some water and bake it. It will not rise again because the leaven, the yeast, has worked its bubbling and fermentation. It won't re-leaven something else. So you have these two ways, but it is so pervasive. You can't really honestly stop it. Right? A second portion of that metaphor for sin and leaven is that the corruption portion of it. That's what I talked about. So you can't really take the leavening out. And what you're left with is you either have to arrest it by stopping it in the baking process, or you have to allow it. It corrupts the whole thing, ruins it all, goes past and beyond. And so the leavening changes the very nature of the dough because you cannot pull it out. If you have leavened dough and you have unleavened dough, they are not the same. They will never be the same. You can't take one and make it into the other again because it has been categorically shifted from what it was. And so in that same way, sin, when it's pervasive, like leaven, affects our entire life. Sin, just like leaven, corrupts, changes, has a potential to, again, if not arrested and stopped, can change our entire life. A warning that Jesus gives can be found in Matthew chapter 16. Let's go to Matthew chapter 16, because we see a very interesting exchange that he has with the religious leaders, some of the religious leaders. We'll pick it up in verse 5, Matthew chapter 16, verse 5. He's speaking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 5, it says, "Now when his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. And Jesus said to them, 'Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Don't buy bread from them. Their bread is not good.' And they reasoned among themselves, saying, 'It is because we have taken no bread.' Yeah, so he's hungry. Where are we going to get bread? Don't go get it from them." Sure, that's what Jesus is saying. But Jesus, being aware of it, verse 8, said to them, "O you of little faith, why do you reason amongst yourselves, because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand? Or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, and how many baskets you took up? Nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000, and how many large baskets you took up? How is it that you do not understand that I do not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees?" That Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So they're thinking about this specific bread thing because he's hungry. He's saying, no. There's more to this concept. We're talking about the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they go and you define it in verse 12. It says, the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. If you want to hold your spot here, we can do a kind of a flip back and forth. Let's go to Luke chapter 12, because we see something else that's brought out in Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Luke chapter 12, first 3 verses. Luke 12, beginning in verse 1. So in the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, Jesus began to say to his disciples, first of all, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Now they said it was a doctrine, right? If you go back, flip back over real quick to Matthew 16, verse 12, it says, they understood that Jesus did not tell them to beware the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So they're teaching. So he's talking about doctrine. But then we jump back over to where Jesus is giving a little bit more insight, a little bit more information here in Luke chapter 12. So he says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known. You know, one of the things that you do when you're leavening bread is called proofing. You put it at a warmer temperature, and you generally put it in a dark spot. You might put a cheesecloth or a light towel over it. You might put it in the warming drawer of your oven, right? It actually gets covered in the leavening process. Because once it gets the amount of leaven that you want in it, if you initiate more, then the balance is off. And it can mess with the taste and messes with the flavor. And this concept when he's talking about the leaven of the Pharisees being hypocrisy, says, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed. You're going to uncover it and we're going to see what is the fruit of that. What is the bread? What is being baked here? Nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have spoken in the dark will be heard in light. What you have spoken in the ear in inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. So you have hypocrisy and you have false teachings. Then we also see a little bit more. What is done in secrecy is going to be found out. There's a way. It has a way of coming out. And the Pharisees were very good at telling everyone what they needed to do and outwardly looking like these glorious sepulchres. But inwardly, they're dead men's bones, or these beautiful white pieces of china and porcelain. But really, the inner part of the cup was dirty. And so the inside is putrid, and it's rotten. You can bake a loaf of bread, and it looks glorious. I know because I grew up and there were times where the bread overproofed because there were 5 of us kids and maybe we weren't listening. And so my mom had to reprimand us. Or maybe we were out doing a chore and you got back in and it had overproofed. And we weren't going to throw it away. And so it baked and it looked like your standard loaf of bread. Like, all right. No, not all right. It was not good. It was not tasty. Right? It was not what you expected. So when Jesus is talking about this leaven of the Pharisees, you can have something that, because it's hypocrisy, because it's not what you're outwardly thinking. I think we talked a couple weeks ago about the parable of the fig tree, when you're talking about sustainable Christianity. You have something that there's an anticipated outcome, an expected return, and yet it is not. And when you have leaven, if it is not controlled, if it is not arrested, you can very easily have it consume, corrupt, in a pervasive manner. So you have these wonderful symbols of leaven in the Bible here. Again, that of pervasiveness and that of corruption. It is brought out here in how Jesus is speaking to the disciples about the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. A second aspect here, as we're considering why it is that God has us throw away leavened bread, is what really the Feast of Unleavened Bread is. At its core, at its crux. It is a call to purity. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is a call to purity. Now, God commanded the Israelites to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It was a 7-day period. If you want to start turning, let's go to Exodus chapter 12. So he tells the Israelites, I want you to do this for 7 days following the Passover, right? You have the Passover, and then you're going to have these days of unleavened bread for 7 days. And we're going to go to Exodus 12, pick it up verse 15 is where we're going to go. Exodus chapter 12, verse 15. Sorry, I didn't say the whole thing. I said Exodus, but Exodus chapter 12, verse 15. But he has them do it for a week. Now, for us, generally speaking, when we talk about removing leaven, any of you like, oh, it's the spring holidays coming up. Let's go on a trip. Not really, right? We're like, can you imagine how exhausting that would be if you're having to de-leaven, you're having to do all these things and prep and go? Well, the children of Israel, they have the Passover. They've already got the staff in hand, the belt on their waist. They're ready to go. And they throw out the leaven and like, we're gone. It's a different kind of thing. And so the beauty of that is that they weren't still living in the house. They started walking. They weren't living in the house that had the corruption in it, which I find very intriguing, because if you go through Leviticus and you see what God's commandments are about if a bug falls into your earthen vessel, or if something gets into here, he's like, well, break the whole vessel. If there's mold here, which yeast is a spore-based thing, as is mold, right? So it's like, if it gets into here, burn the house, right? You have all these different things that he gives as parameters for how to deal with stuff. But here, what the children of Israel are is like, get out of that place. And so they're going out of Egypt, and they hit this wonderful opportunity to not only physically put leaven out, but also to, in addition to that, physically remove themselves from that which is impure. They didn't even stay in the same area that had any remnants of the impurity. They left Egypt. Exodus chapter 12, verses 15 through 20 we'll read. It says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. Whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. There's such an important component here because there is a separation. If you're going to take in this stuff that is equated with impurity, right, then you are going to be cut off. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. On the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. Everlasting is everlasting, right? We still do this today. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. And again here, even before God gives them the 10 Commandments and says it's the same for the stranger as it is for the foreigner, he tells them here, consistency. This is a beautiful thing about God, very consistent. Verse 20, you shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwellings you shall eat unleavened bread. So we have this wonderful call to the children of Israel that they're going to be prepared. He says, because by the time we come around to it, I will have delivered your armies out of the land of Egypt. So we have this very significant thing, this festival that symbolizes a call to remove sin. And we went over that in the symbolism from before. To remove sin, to live our lives in sincerity and in truth. That was brought out in the first message. But I'd like to turn to an Old Testament chapter and book based on that. Let's go to Joshua chapter 24. Joshua chapter 24. Here, the leader of Israel at this time, Joshua, much like Moses did when the book of Deuteronomy is there, he's reminding Israel of the covenant that their fathers cut at Sinai. He's saying, now you as the next generation, you're going to be going into the promised land, and you're going to be inheriting these things. And I want to remind you of what God wants. Now here is Joshua towards the end of his life. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 14. Joshua chapter 24, verse 14 says, now therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth. If you actually read the preceding verses to this in this chapter, you see him recounting their deliverance from Egypt. And this is a big thing, because the likelihood of the living Israelites at that time to have been there and known it is much lower. Joshua was one of two over the age of 20 who left Egypt, right? was there at Sinai when the covenant was cut, was over 20 years. So it's like you think about what your earliest memory might be. So these were only people who are younger than 20. But Joshua is saying at the end of his life, and he's been blessed with longevity, he was blessed with the opportunity to go into the promised land. And he says, all these things, all the background, this is what has brought us to where we are. Now therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river, which is the Jordan, and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. Now this is them in the promised land. If you go back to, we talked about the wave sheaf a little bit in the Bible study last week. And the wave sheaf was there at the beginning of their time in the promised land. So that had been given. That had opened the door for them to be able to have life, for them to be able to have sustenance, for them to be able to have everything. And it's interesting because the Israelites who left Egypt, right? When they left, they put leaven out of their homes. They have Passover, right? They have unleavened bread on that night, the 14th, and from the 14th until the 21st. So you actually get 8 days there because you're including the 14th, and then you'll go all the way through. So you've got it from the night where you kill the Passover lamb, you're having unleavened bread. There is no leavening in your home. It's gone. And you move forward through. They did not have leavening or the opportunity to have leavening. Instead, what they got was they got pure bread provided to them. All the way up through, they get to the promised land. And there they are on the cusp of the promised land. And Joshua reminds them and says, hey, look, remember, this is your covenant as we go over. And God says, we have to do the wave sheaf offering here to acknowledge God, acknowledge what he has done, acknowledge looking forward to the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to allow them to be able to have sustenance, to have a more perfect bread that is through Jesus Christ. You can go read that in John 6 and 7. But we have this wonderful significance here of that purity because the parents of this generation that Joshua is talking to, from the time that they left Egypt, should not have had any impurity, any impure bread. But what does he tell them? He says, your fathers who served gods on the other side of the river. Remember, they made a calf. Remember, they did these other things. God gives the opportunity to take it away. It's a call to put aside those things that are impure. This practice is continued. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 6. Leviticus chapter 6, verses 14 through 18. Leviticus 6, 14 through 18. This is not just something that the children of Israel did, but as we mentioned, it's an everlasting covenant and an ordinance that God is expecting us to do. And in chapter 6, verse 14, we read, it says, this is the law of the grain offering. The sons of Aaron shall offer it on the altar before the Lord. He shall take from it his handful of the fine flour of the grain offering with its oil and all the frankincense which is on the grain offering, and shall burn it on the altar for a sweet aroma as a memorial to the Lord. This is talking about the grain offering. And the remainder of it Aaron and his son shall eat with unleavened bread. It shall be eaten in a holy place. In the court of the tabernacle of meeting they shall eat it. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as their portion of my offerings made by fire. It is most holy, like the sin offering and the trespass offering. These offerings that are given to God, which we know that Jesus Christ, as he takes on the mantle of our sin and our trespasses, those were not offered with leaven. Those were not offered with leaven at all. It says, all the males among the children of Aaron may eat it. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. Concerning offerings made by fire to the Lord, everyone who touches them must be holy. Every bit of grain that is offered to God with fire is done so without leaven. Now we know that there are the loaves that are on the table, the showbread, and we know that those are there, right? But everything that was offered to God by fire, that was consumed by the priesthood, was unleavened. At least when we're talking about it from the tabernacle standpoint, from the offering standpoint. That's an interesting thing. Because it's not like we go around the rest of the time. It's like, I'm not saying that the priest never ate leavened bread, right? But what I'm saying is that if it was given to God, it was not leavened. If it was an offering, a sin offering, a trespass offering, there was no leaven in that grain offering that was given to God. That's a pretty phenomenal thing. We're talking about a continuing and ongoing purity. An ongoing purity that is there. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread really does picture that, because leavening is not a part of what is offered to God. A third section here, as we consider why it is that God has us throw out leavened bread, is that removing leaven yields a lot of lessons as far as personal reflection, as far as the physical act, and as far as the spiritual parallels. We've covered some of those already. But removing leaven from our home, it really does involve a little bit of a hide and seek, searching, finding, to eliminate any of those leavened products. And it serves as that metaphor for self-examination. If we're going about the actions of getting leaven out of our homes, and you're not thinking as you try to shove your hand between the narrowest portion of the car seat and the center console about how hard it is to get leaven out of your life, you're missing an opportunity, right? If you're not thinking about, where did I last eat a sandwich? And did I drop a crumb there? Then you're not taking the opportunity to consider why it is that we're doing this. Because one of the things, like throwing out bread. Anybody here, like, even if you're gluten-free, even if you have celiacs, there's some aspect of bread that we consume. You can have cornmeal, you can have all these other things. There are different things that are there. We consume, every culture consumes some type of bread. I was having a conversation with my kids earlier this week about this concept of grain and bread and other things like that. And it's like every culture has one. Rice is a grain. It's not any different if you mash up rice. You can get rice flour, you can get cassava flour, you can get all these different starches that you can use to make breads, and every culture has one like that. It's inherent to all of them. So it can yield a lot of wonderful parallels. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 4. Some of these lessons, we're just going to pull out 3 of them. But let's go to Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Proverbs 4, verse 23. Perhaps not a place that you would think to turn to talk about leavening. But when we talk about the lessons that God wants us to learn, I think that this verse encapsulates at least the 3 that I'm going to bring out today. Proverbs chapter 4, we'll begin in verse 23, and we'll read through to verse 27. Proverbs 4, verses 23 to 27. It says, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let your ways be established. Do not turn to the right or the left. Remove your foot from evil." 3 lessons that I pulled out here as far as removing leaven, and those lessons that it yields for us is, I'll give them to you right off the bat, and then we'll kind of go into them. Diligence, awareness, and commitment. Now each of us, as we consider the diligence, the awareness, and the commitment that we might have when we're talking about the de-leavening process, I can pretty much guarantee 100% that if we were to have conversations with one another, we would define a level of diligence, a level of awareness, and a level of commitment to getting the leaven out of our homes at varying levels. Right? How vigorously are you going to go after that? How diligent are you going to be about it? Our family, we tend to kind of try to, you begin strangling the leaven down to the kitchen is what we do in our house. And then it's like, okay, you're in the kitchen, and it's in a box in the kitchen. And then it gets smaller and smaller, and the last thing we do is the car, right? That's our process, right? But everybody, even with that, figuring out how much you do, how much you're going into it. And if we are just doing cleaning for the sake of cleaning, and then you get overrun by the concept of cleaning and this spring cleaning idea, maybe you lose the lesson and the reminder of what it is to get leaven out. So everybody has to find that balance, but we all have to deal with the aspects of diligence, our own awareness, and the commitment we have to getting to it. Because there are times, I know in the middle of the summer, where I have eaten something in the car, and it has fallen out of my hand, like a piece of a burger bun or something, and it goes into that spot, and I think to myself, I'm going to have to look for that in the spring. You probably clean your car more frequently than I do. But, it's one of those things where I think about that, and it's like, do I remember that? How aware am I of that? Maybe I forget about it until March, and I was like, oh yeah, there was that. I got to find that. Where is that? I think I've shared the story about the disappearing yeast packet that was in our refrigerator one year. It's just like, Jacqueline and I both know, we cleaned the butter area, which is where we had the yeast packet, and I didn't see it. But the day after unleavened bread is over, I flip up the thing to put a new pack of butter in. Down drops the yeast packet, right? He's like, you know it's there, but how aware are we? How committed are we? It's like, do I need to take it all the way apart? Do I need to pull the seat out of the car to do? You have to answer that question. You have to figure out what your level of diligence is for doing things. But Proverbs chapter 4, verses 23 to 27, I think does a great job of bringing this out, because it says, put away from you a deceitful mouth and put perverse lips far from you. That is not an easy thing. There was a time in my childhood where I thought that coarse language was cool. Maybe you went through one of those spurts yourself. It is a tough habit to kick once you think it's cool and you start down that path. It takes diligence, trying to control your lips, a deceitful mouth. I mean, if you've ever been in a situation where you've lied and then you felt like you have to keep lying to protect the original, it's like it just builds on itself, kind of like leaven. A little lie ruins the whole thing, and it takes so much effort. You can't even extract it back out. You're just stuck in it, and you have to arrest it, and it takes fire to burn that out. Sometimes it's from the hand of a parent, right? And sometimes that is another consequence in life. But those things need to be arrested. So we have the diligence there with our tongue, with our lips. It says, let your eyes look straight ahead. There's an awareness there, and your eyelids look right before you. It can be so easy to flit around. I'm driving in the car, and my kids all have these great ideas and things that they see, and they want me to look at it. I was like, you know what I'm doing? I'm driving. What is my principal responsibility while I'm driving? I got to keep everybody in the car safe. I'm not going to look at what you're wanting me to look at. I'm not going to turn over here because I'm doing something right now. It looks like I'm just sitting in a chair, but I'm doing something. It takes work. It takes awareness. Likewise, again, when we're talking about sin and we're talking about leaven, it takes awareness. I think I mentioned this last year when I was talking about it. We all know where we eat in our houses. And you also know where you don't eat. It's kind of like our Christianity and our walk. You know the areas that you got to work on. And it's hard when somebody else tells you about those. But you know the ones that you need to work on. And you also, you're like, you know what, I know that I'm okay there. That is not an area that I struggle with. Right? And different people have different areas. Now we have to be careful because there are times where we might think that we are strong in a facet and in an aspect of our life, and we aren't. Right? We have to be open to that. But generally speaking, if we're honest with ourselves, if we're asking God, like David did, saying, create in me a clean heart, show me the different areas that I have to work on to become a better person, we have a pretty good idea where those are. That awareness needs to be consistently in place. And then talking about the commitment, it says, ponder the path of your feet and let your eyes be established. Do not turn to the left or to the right or to the left. Remove your foot from evil. It takes a lot to be committed to doing it, to walking the walk the entire time. You can go back to Matthew 16:12. We were talking about the leaven of the Pharisees. It is hypocrisy. It is so easy to say and not do because it requires nothing of me. I can just say it. That's easy. But then this feeds right back to the beginning of this when we were talking about the diligence of the mouth. It's like, the perverseness of your lips and your mouth and what we say, they need to be all lockstep, fine-tuned, married together so that we are producing diligence, awareness, and commitment. So these lessons that we can have all come from this concept, not just of sin, but leaven really brings it out. Because when we're talking about leavened bread, the leavened bread really does manifest in those ways. Because if you're just talking about flat bread, it doesn't do it. If you're just talking about wine or other things that are fermented, your kimchi is not going to teach you this lesson, right? But the bread does, as we watch it rise, as we watch it degrade, as we watch it be a part of our everyday life. A fourth section I'd like to cover today is the consequences of ignoring spiritual leaven. The consequences of ignoring spiritual leaven. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 4. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Ignoring spiritual leaven can have profound effects. It affects us personally. It affects us as a community. And we get that here in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. We're going to pick it up in verse 18. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18, because this is the lead-in to 1 Corinthians 5. Now, if you're familiar with what's going on in the congregation at Corinth, well, let's read it. We'll get the context here. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. Now, some of you are puffed up as though I were not coming to you. You ever have that where you're like, when they say the cat is away, the mouse will play? Right? It's that concept. But he's like, you're puffed up, you're prideful, like I'm not going to come and see you. Because, wait till Paul comes. Wait till Dad gets home. Right? That whole concept where you're like, if you know that the chickens are coming home to roost, or whatever metaphor you want to use, if you know that that is coming and you are going to have to pay the piper, plans be getting made on how you're going to be scarce, or whatever you're going to do to try to downplay the consequences coming. And Paul's saying, you're puffed up as though I were not coming to you, but I will come to you shortly, if the Lord wills, and I will know not the word of those who are puffed up, but the power. For the kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. What do you want? Shall I come to you with a rod, or in love and a spirit of gentleness? He's like, how do you want me to come? So he's essentially saying, look, guys, I know that there are things that are being done. There's a puffing up that is occurring. Please take care of it. I don't want to come to have to address that, is what he's saying. He said, it is actually, verse 1 of chapter 5 now, it is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and such sexual immorality as is not even named among the Gentiles, that a man has his father's wife. And you are puffed up, and have not rather mourned, but he who has done this deed, that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you. For I indeed am absent in body, but present in spirit, have already judged, as though I were present. He's like, I don't need to be there to see this, to make a judgment. I don't need more context. I can tell you it's wrong all the way from over here. Right? And it's like, if we look at things, we can see things of what God is expecting and anticipating. He's like, we know what God would judge on a matter because we have seen his heart through the scriptures. We understand them. We can very clearly say, yeah, that's wrong. I can call that out. I don't need extra backing to do that. And that's what Paul's saying here. He's like, this is not right. I've already judged it as though I were present. I have already judged him who has so done this deed. Verse 4, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, when you are gathered together along with my spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, deliver such a one to Satan, for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. See, there's something to be said. When we think we're getting away with something, that tacit approval, we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about some of the parables, right? Parables that fit with everything that in the spring holy days, as Jesus is trying to teach his disciples. We had the parable of the wicked servant who begins to beat his fellow servants, drink with the drunkards. Why? Because my master delays his coming. Oh, he's not coming yet. I got time to do what I want. And so when we think we're getting away with something, we can think that we have a little bit more liberty than we actually do. And Paul is saying, you know what you need to do? Deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. You don't want that person to think that what they're doing is okay. And when we see that and we see it around us, then it can affect us as well. And then we get to verse 6. which we already read. Oftentimes we read this verse, but we don't read the stuff beforehand. Maybe it's a little bit, that feels icky. Let's not talk about sexual immorality when we're talking about leavened bread. But that's what the context is here, because you see how much it is pervasive. You see how much it affects others around us. Remember, I talked about having personal as well as like a community influence on those who are around us when we have sin. It says, your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? You think this isn't affecting you? If you know that there's something going on, and we've seen this in our family, if somebody is out of whack in the family, it affects the whole family. You don't just have one person having an off day, it affects the whole family. And if we have that within a congregation, it's the same thing. If we have that within a body of church, it's the same thing. It affects everyone. Jesus says this. He says, we're all members of one body, right? And if one member suffers, we all suffer. I guess that would have been Paul in another spot. Inspired by Jesus. But Paul says it in other places. So verse 7, therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I wrote to you in my epistle not to keep company with sexually immoral people. Yet I certainly did not mean with the sexually immoral people of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or idolaters, since then you would not need to go out to the world. So what he's saying is, I wrote you this earlier. We get a little bit of backstory. He'd written them to not keep company with sexually immoral people. They're like, okay, avoid all those temple prostitutes. Don't talk to them. Avoid all the people outside. But when they have it within their own midst, we're not judging it as nefarious and as dangerous as those people. It can be very easy to be like an us and a them sort of scenario. It's like, well, we aren't eating leavened bread now. Sinners out there are. We aren't doing these bad, and you fail to look inwardly. And so Paul's saying, okay, this principle, don't keep company with sexually immoral people. It's like, I was telling you about the people within. Look inside. Root out the sin that is inside. But now I have written to you, verse 11, of chapter 5 in 1 Corinthians, now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even to eat with such a person. Because what happens is it affects us, and it affects them. Because they think they're all right. I'm still okay enough to be a part of the body. If something is rotting and decaying, if leaven is breaking it down, if you do not arrest it and get it out, it will affect the entirety. I've gone over the book of Numbers when we were talking about the innumerable multitude, or the mixed multitude that came with the children of Israel, wanting to have meat, and then the children of Israel wanted to have meat, and tens of thousands of them were killed because they complained against the Lord again. Those who are around us affect us. Verse 12, for what have I to do with judging those who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside? But those who are outside, God judges. Therefore put away from yourselves the evil person. This is the context of purging out the old leaven and being a new lump. And we can take this on a community side of things. I'm not saying we're all going on a witch hunt, right? What I am saying is that we need to take this same level of ferocity. If we would say, if there was someone in the congregation that was doing that, we would call it out. Amen. Yes, we would. Do you call it out in yourself with the same level of intensity? Or perhaps are we a little bit of what we read in Matthew chapter 16, right? Perhaps we're a little bit more hypocritical. Perhaps what is done and said in secret can stay in secret. The point of this is that we want to make sure we do not ignore spiritual leaven. And Paul brings that out very much here in 1 Corinthians 4 and 5, because it needs to be addressed for the sake of purity. Remember, the lesson here in the days of unleavened bread is a pursuit of purity. And so we put out leaven. Now this process of ditching leavened bread, I would argue, is not as much a call to get rid of leavened bread, though we do that because God says it, but it is something that goes against what we like, and that is to take in something new, right? Any sort of habit that you have right? The best opportunity you have to overcome that poor habit or that poor behavior is to replace it with something else. And so when God says you purge out the leaven, you think about what the children of Israel did. You can see this again in Exodus 12. What did they do? First day. It says, on the first day you shall get rid of all the leaven in your home. Okay, they're done. And we get rid of the leaven so that by the time we have the Passover and that, so from that evening on, we should not have leaven in our homes, right? It's clean, it's good. Well, they did it in a day. How much of the rest of their time, when they were eating unleavened bread, did they spend de-leavening? Well, they were walking for 7 days. There's no extra de-leavening going on. They're given manna for 40 years. There's no extra de-leavening going on. They're moving, they're shifting around, right? Once God started giving them perfect, pure bread from heaven, that's what they ate. That's what they took in. The difficulty for us, though, and I think one of the reasons why it's so important for us to do this on a yearly basis is because you can go back over to Kroger and you can go pick up a new loaf of bread. You can bake your own new loaf of bread and boom, leaven is right back in the house. We say, come in. Can you imagine? I don't know, let's just hypothetically, you get baptized and you say, you know what, God, I'm going to do this. You have that first Passover. Oh, what an event. And you never eat another piece of leavened bread in your life. Because that's what an entire generation of Israelites did. They died without even another piece of leavened bread. Because they didn't have it. That's a pretty big call to action. It was about putting in that which was pure. Now, they didn't get the lesson, and we get that. We understand that. Paul talks about they all died. Their carcasses are in the wilderness. We understand that. But the principle is you get out that which is impure. You take it out, and then it's out. And then you just take in that which is pure for the remainder of life, the remainder of your time. We're called to embrace the unleavened bread. That's what unleavened bread is about. To embrace living in sincerity and truth. Removing that leavened bread for each and every one of us from our homes, from our cars, from our desks at work, wherever that might be, should be a profound spiritual exercise. It should cause us to examine ourselves. It should cause us to eliminate sin, seek to put that out of our lives, and to recommit our lives to holiness. And that symbol of bread is the one that actually manifests that most for our life. That's why God has us put out leavened bread.